All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning still. My name is Ben Parsons. I'm Chief of Staff for DTI here in Delaware. And it's my pleasure to introduce Duncan Bachen, courtesy of Diamond Technologies. Duncan's going to present today for us on lessons learned from a breach. Duncan has been an IT professional for over 30 years, representing national, local, and international organizations, originally intending to combine his love of film and computers in the special effects industry with a BFA from Ithaca College. Duncan has instead brought his eye for detail and quality to his IT career. He's a passionate problem solver who likes to think outside of the box. He's certified in MCSE, MCSA, and MCP, pursuing a CSSP and a CEH, and that is more acronyms than I could ever hope to have after my name. In his spare time, he enjoys movies, theaters, games, and puzzles, and all kinds, as well as being active in a medieval recreation group. Well, good morning, Duncan, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Good afternoon. Thanks, everybody, for attending today. I'm going to pivot a little bit. As just introduced, one of my other passions is I like to talk. And people who I work with can attest to this when they see my emails, which are very detail-oriented and tend to go on, but I like to give a lot of information. And try as I might over the last couple of days, I've given this presentation myself 3 or 4 times, and I can't seem to get it under 50 minutes. And I'm not a 3-slide kind of guy, so I'm going to try to wing through some of these slides in the beginning that I intended to go through a little more in detail, and hit some of those at a higher level. But hopefully they'll still speak for themselves, and we'll cover some of the higher level topics here without getting into the details. We did the introduction already, but you didn't get a chance to see my scary IT security guy photo. You'll notice that all security guys tend to have no hair because we look scarier that way, and when we have hair, we tend to be friendlier. So I have the friendly hair persona for you guys today. We're going to start by talking, before we get into the lessons learned, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about incident handling in general. We're going to talk about some definitions and best practices, and we're going to take a look specifically at the different phases of incident handling, and we're going to focus a lot on the 4th phase, which is the post-incident handling after you've had a breach and what to do at that point. This isn't a one-size-fits-all, right? What we're going to go through here today is going to cover a variety of things that may be appropriate for a large organization, may be available for a small organization. So, you'll hear some things in here that may or may not be appropriate to you. So take from them, what you find to be appropriate or what you might be able to use to your advantage within your own organization. To get started for our framework, what we're going to go through is we're going to talk about NIST Special Publication 800-61. This is the Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. Now, this guide is extremely detailed. It outlines, it's 79 pages in length. It's something that we could do an entire presentation on by itself. We're not going to get into that today here, but I would recommend that if you have a team, I would recommend you go through that with them or spend some time going through that yourself. The one we're working from is based on revision 2. It's about 10 years old. Even though it's that old, it wears the test of time, right? The foundational stuff that they're going to talk about is still applicable today, even though the attack methods of the bad actors have changed. The way we respond to the incidents have not. Revision 3 is currently in the works and is being ratified and should be hopefully done this year. There's 4 primary phases to incident response. They are preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and post-incident activity. During the preparation phase, we're going to be establishing and training our response team. We're going to be acquiring the tools we need. We're going to be implementing any kind of controls that we may have learned from previous risk assessments. But no matter how much we prepare, there's always going to be some sort of residual risk. So we need to prepare and plan for phase 2, which is going to be our detection and analysis. As we detect these events, we move into our containment, eradication, and recovery, and that becomes a circular nature. We contain something, we eradicate it, we move back to detection, and that process will continue until it's fully contained or you're fully recovered. And it's only then that you move into the fourth phase, which is your post-incident activity. That's the point where we're going to write a report, we're going to get a chance to look back, and we're going to reflect on the cost of the incident. These costs are both going to be financial costs and non-financial costs. We're going to get a chance to look at what happened, and we're going to evaluate what can we do to prevent those kinds of things in the past, in the future, and then we're going to revise our plans to be better prepared for those incidents moving forward. The preparation phase this is where we don't want to skimp any of our time, right? In a few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some specific things that you're going to want to prepare ahead of time, such as your incident response policy, your incident response team, and a couple other items. But here's a couple of the key items that you're really going to focus on during a preparation phase. You're going to make sure you're going to identify your critical data and your systems and any single points of failure. You're going to want to make sure you've got a response policy that's been approved by your management team. You're going to want to train your team on incident response. When you're in the middle of an incident, now's not the time to be figuring out how you're going to do something. And way too often, people are kind of winging it as they go. The better prepared you are, the better you're going to be able to respond quickly when these events happen. You're going to want to implement a team if you can. Now, this is not obviously something you can do when you've got a smaller organization. You don't have the resources to put together a team ahead of time. You're going to want to plan your coordination and your communication with your stakeholders and any of your outside parties. This is going to be, depending on the nature of your industry, this is going to involve potentially law enforcement, other agencies, third-party vendors, and things like that. You want to consider that the possibility that your primary method of communication may not be available. So if you've got a call tree and you're planning on using your phone system to call people and you've lost your phone system, well, then that's gone, right? So make sure you've got the preparation for, do we have an additional way to contact the people necessary in the event of a disaster? When we look about the detection analysis, a lot of this stuff can and is handled manually by teams, but whenever possible, you're going to want to automate this process. The automating allows you to speed up that early detection, right? Something malicious can linger in your system for a long time, and it may not always be right in your face with, hey, I've encrypted your system, pay attention to me. So you want your detection things to work throughout a period of time and identify these things over the long term. You want to not only detect using the data that you have, but you want to use threat analysis and intelligence from outside industries to be aware of the kinds of attack vectors and threats against your organization so you know what to look for. In a particular sign, you want to look for precursors, and you want to look for indicators of things that are going on, activity within your environment. You want to make sure during your detection analysis that you're following your standard incident documentation. Now, this is something that you would have put together during your preparation phase. You want to make sure that you've got a standard document. How am I going to record the stuff that's going on here? Am I going to be capturing screenshots? Am I going to be putting my name on it? Am I going to be putting a time and date on it? This information is not only important when you're trying at the end to put together a root cause analysis and a timeline, but you never know when the information that you're collecting might be necessary for either legal proceedings or criminal prosecution at the end. So you want to make sure that you slow down as you're going through the process and you're documenting what's happening so you can recover that information later on if necessary. During your detection analysis, you also want to make sure that you prioritize your response. This is going to be based on a couple key things: the functional impact to your business, information impact, and recoverability effort. Again, things going on during preparation phase, once you understand the levels of these kinds of things, you'll be able to prioritize which thing do I recover first. Depending on the size of your team, you may not be able to recover everything at once. So if you have to recover A before B before C and not do things simultaneously, you'll be making decisions on, is it better to bring up one big thing or is it better to bring up 4 small things? And the impact to your business is going to drive what you're going to recover and in which order you're going to recover those things in. The containment, eradication, and recovery. Now, what's important here is the order in which those are in. You want to contain it before you get rid of it, before you recover from it. Now, that may seem obvious, but it's not. And we've had situations where you start recovering from stuff and you haven't got rid of the problem in the first place. You're going to be wasting your time because you'll be fighting an uphill battle. Okay? While you're going through your evidence gathering and your handling, whenever possible, try to take a snapshot of the system as it exists today. Now, given the state of the event that's going on, that may not be possible. Your primary tools may not be available to you. But if you have the possibility to take a snapshot or maintain the state of any given system that you're investigating, you want to do that. It's going to change. It'll change during normal production. It's going to change because the malicious actor might still be on there. It's going to change just by the very fact that you're investigating it and running through logs. So if you're able to get a snapshot from a point in time, you make sure that nothing is lost because you never know what might be critical in the future. Your goal through this phase is really just to isolate the attack and identify all the affected hosts that are going on. You want to choose a containment strategy which makes sense and is appropriate. This might be shutting off a system. This might be disconnecting it from the network, or this might be just disabling certain functionality within the system. It really depends on the kind of situation that you're in and the importance to your business. Understanding that the containment strategy you pick, may be best for containment, may hamper your efforts to bring the system back online in production, or may hamper your efforts in remediation. So those things should be considered as part of your preparation phase. You unplug a system, that's great, but now how do I get to it? Make sure you've got offline tools, make sure you have the way to bring that up in a safe environment in a VM, make sure you have a way to clone that machine. First thing though, is containment. In the lack of anything else, if it means unplugging that machine and keeping that thing from running wild in your system, figure out how you're going to deal with it after the fact, and don't be trying to deal with, how do I keep this production system up? And when I talk about some of the lessons learned later, that's one of them that bit one of our customers pretty good. Identify the attacker, but you want to stay focused on your primary goal. Don't be so concerned about who it was that was attacking me as what they did and how you're going to recover from that. It's within human nature. I want to know who the bad guy is, but I don't get so caught up in there that I'm wasting valuable time during recovery trying to track that down. The data that you're going to discover as you go through the process will help you uncover that after the fact, because the data is not going to change. You can go back and put the pieces together to put your roadmap of what happened, but don't try to do that when you're going through the event in the beginning. You want to restore to normal operation, right? Your goal is to restore from clean backups. You might be rebuilding from scratch. And as you're going, you might be tightening the network perimeter. If you find a big hole while you're going through the remediation process, you don't have to wait till the very end. Go deal with that situation right now because that hole is still open and the attack might still be coming in. Now, this is going to be a phased approach, right? Depending on the prioritization that you've got and you've already planned for, you're going to be moving back and forth between containment, recovery, eradication. If you're able to successfully contain and eradicate a subsystem or a portion of your business, and you're able to recover from that and start doing normal business, and you know it's safe to do so, then go ahead and do that, right? This also might shift. You might have set a bunch of prioritization in place and have this great plan, and then it all goes to hell during the event. So you're going to have to be able to be ready to pivot and make changes based on what's happening within your business and what's happening with your staff during the event as the things are going on. Decided not to go to the next page. All right, so let's go to this. And that's not going to work either. Sorry, guys. The laptop just decided to not move forward. Give me a second. I don't know what just crashed. All right. Well, we're going to have to wing this then, aren't we, while I reboot. All right, let's talk about the post-incident activity. Or I'll get, can we switch, Josh, to the slide there, and let's have you move it through? we'll just go to the slide. If you have my copy, this one here?
Yep.
All right. Great. That's the back, that's the forward. There we go. All right. When we get to the post-incident activity, we're going to want to identify all the evidence that needs to be retained. We're going to make sure we use the collected incident data that we have. We're going to look at and we're going to reflect on any of the new threats, any new technologies available to us, any of the lessons that we may have learned from that. Now, your post-incident activity, you really want to make sure this is a subjective thing. And this is going to be tough because the team that's doing your post-incident activity, you may have been the ones that were in the trenches when all this was going on. And nobody wants to have egg on their face and say, hey, it was my fault that something happened, or it was our fault, or we made a mistake. But the only way you're going to improve upon your process is to really look back on it and say what went right and what went wrong. So try to stay as neutral as possible as you go through that assessment. You're going to do a retrospective. You're going to go back and you're going to look at those first 3 phases of your preparation, detection, and containment and say what went right, what went wrong, and you're going to evaluate those things and look to make those changes moving forward. You want to evaluate, did we have the right tools and resources to do the job the way we needed to? Was our team set up for success? Did we have the right structure? Were we trained properly to handle these things? Did some things come up that we weren't planning for? Was our documentation correct? Did we have the things documented we needed to ahead of time? Were we able to write up the reports we needed afterwards? While you aren't going to use all of these questions, you might have some of your own. These are the kinds of things that you want to ask yourself in the retrospective. And we won't go through all of these right now, but there's a couple ones on here I want to point out. What are the steps or actions that might have inhibited the recovery? You've planned for all these things. What are the unplanned things that you didn't account for? And how could you account for them better at that in the future? Or maybe you are not able to do that. Did you have people that were unexpectedly on vacation? Was there construction going on in the area you were in recently, the affected power or internet during the middle of one of your breaches? You're going to want to say, hey, maybe we weren't up to date on certain precursors, so we weren't paying attention to what else is going on, or our tools are out of date, so we weren't able to see what was happening in the future. So as you take a look through this list here, give some ideas of the kinds of questions you're going to want to ask yourselves and your teams when you go through these retrospectives after the fact. Within the SP 861, there's an incident checklist that you can take a look at. It's kind of high level here. It might vary from incident to incident, but it kind of gives you an idea of some major steps that you're going to want to go through as your evaluation here. All right, in the advanced planning section here, I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, I think. And this was supposed to be a general topic here today. So some of these from concepts, you're going to have heard these terms before and know about them, but they're really important to have in place. And I know it's documentation. People are like, well, why do I need these things? Because you need them when you need them, and you hope you never need them, right? It's a weird thing to say, but you don't be scrambling when that happens. And when people talk about things like business continuity plans, well, why do I need one? Well, because when you're running around with your head cut off because everything's on fire, you don't want to be doing that. You want to know that you've made the decisions that are going to be in place that are appropriate for your business to continue operations the way they need to. And so while we're focusing a lot today on cyber security risks, your business continuity plan is going to cover much more than that, right? It's going to be natural disasters. It's going to be fire. It's going to be terrorist attacks. It's going to be supply chain interruptions like we saw, throughout the U.S. over the last couple of years. Your business continuity plan covers all of those things. One of those happens to be what happens in the event of a cybersecurity attack. What are we going to do? So you want to proactively make sure you have all those processes and procedures in place to keep your operations running in the event of a disruption. Where do we move our team to? Do we have disaster recovery? We've been in too many cases where a team is not prepared for what's going on and their staff is just standing around like, what do I do next? Because nobody's thought ahead of time what they should be doing next. I'm not going to go through all the details of the continuity plan here today just for purposes of time. Your plan is going to have some high-level stuff on here. You're going to have your checklist. You're going to have your notification systems. We talked about making sure you've got some backups to those systems in case your primary system goes down. There's going to be some guidance for your management team in there. What's important is also to know how and when you're going to enact the plan. Who is it that's going to make the decision to say, we're going to enact the BCP? We've reached the point of disaster. Is that one individual? Is that multiple individuals? Is that, do people have authority to make those decisions? That's one of the things that the military is really good about, right? There's never a question of who's making a decision, because that decision has been made ahead of time. That's what you need to have here. You don't want people to be butting heads and saying, you don't have permission to do this, or I have permission to do this. You want to have all those things worked out ahead of time so that the people who are doing the recovery can move quickly through the disaster into the next effort. The business impact analysis. This is really important when you want to talk about your prioritization. When you're trying to figure out what's important, it's what's important to the business. It's not what's important to Mary in accounting. It's not what's important to John in marketing, right? It's what's important to the business. And the business is going to drive the criticality based on, the impact financially and for their long-term growth. You need to understand what the effects and consequences are to the interruption of your business. You need to understand what the core critical part of your business is. And if you lost it all, what order do you need to bring it back to get the majority of your business operating? And understand that might take days, that might take weeks, and in some cases it might take months. So going through that exercise before you're going through a disaster is critical so that your team can react and they can prioritize and spend their effort in the right places. The sooner they can spend their effort in the right places, the sooner they're going to get you back on track. So spend time developing a good business impact analysis if you don't already have one. Then you come to your incident response policy. Now, you got policies that talk about the policies are the why are we doing this. They encompass things like your mission statement. They're going to talk about the vision and strategy of a business, but they're not going to get into the finer details of how you're going to actually do something. They're going to outline the overarching roadmap for things. And then you'll typically have a series of policies that you'll have in place that'll walk you through the finer details of how you pull things together. In the case of incident response, there's kind of something in the middle here. There's an incident response plan. Kind of sits between the procedures and the policy. And that's because in this particular case, you're going to have procedures that are going to cross across different boundaries of your business, right? You're going to have functionally, you have all these different areas your business is going to be impacted. So you're going to have procedures that may not be directly related to each other. So your plan gives you the ability to bring all of those procedures together in such a way that you've got an overall roadmap for recovery. So the response plan then takes all these individual procedures, pulls them together and says, here's how we're going to reach the recovery of our ultimate goal that the team is going to pull together. This is going to be unique for every organization. It's going to be determined by the size and structure and function of your team. If you're a really small team, maybe you don't have this. If you're an international organization, you're absolutely going to need to do this because you're going to be coordinating on a much different scale than you are for a small business. Your response plan, again, is going to have some of the same strategies and goals in here and approval, but you're really it's going to talk about some other things in there. Things like metrics you may think are something that are only applicable after the fact. Well, that's not necessarily true. If your goal as you're doing recovery has things in there that allow you to pivot, you need to know what those metrics are as you're making success. Because if you have a decision factor that says, if we're not up 50% by 4 days, then we're going to be able to do something else, you need to be able to measure what this 50% is. So in this case, if you've got metrics that are driving decisions, those should be involved and included in your plan as well, so you can make the appropriate decisions as they go. If you can, and you're a large enough organization, you want to put together an incident response team, right? This is people ahead of time who are going to be trained in how to deal with the incidents going on. It's going to be a cross-functional group of people, right? It's going to include your management. It's going to include experts from each of your different business divisions. It's going to include your IT staff and your engineers. But it's also going to include things like legal representatives, your legal team if you have it. It's going to include your HR team, right? Not only because these are people who are going to be directly the ones that are going to help in the recovery, in the case of a cyber event, but because they're going to be involved in the overall effort and the impact to your business. You know, if there's going to be things like overtime costs, HR is going to need to be involved with that. If there's going to be legal ramifications about disclosure, your legal team is going to be involved in that. So having those people involved with a seat at the table in advance of an incident is critical to the whole process. So you put together this team and you train them on not only incident response in general, but specifically your plan, right? You want to work with and go through a process with the plan that you've put together and said, here's our plan, and you practice it so you know who's going to be responding to what in the event of a disaster. You're going to have a couple different members of your team here. You're going to have some that are going to be collecting your evidence, reporting the incident, some are going to be assessing the damage. You're going to have some that are going to be working on remediation and lessons learned for the root cause analysis. Things to consider for your team, are they full-time members? Are they part-time members? Are you a 24/7 organization? And if an event were to happen overnight, are your team members you need going to be available to you at that time? What's the impact going to be to employee morale if they're going to be working for long hours or continuing hours? Cost here is, just a consideration. It's going to cost you something for these team members to be part of the incident team and part of the event. You shouldn't shy away from that, but you should understand what those costs are going to be so they're not unexpected. You don't want to be looking at a calculator and saying, oh, you can only work one more hour because you're going to be overtime, in the middle of an event. You want to be able to have some of that information ahead of time so you're not worried about those kinds of things. Sharing information. Sharing information is sometimes we talk about not sharing enough information, like too little information is bad, but the inverse can also happen. Too much information can also be bad, right? If you start sharing information with team members before you have the whole picture, or you're making guesses about maybe what the incident's causing, that speculation can cause more problems. If you're a public company, this can impact stocks and trading and other things or disclosure. So, as part of that incident response team, if you're an organization, you would typically have somebody involved in your communications team, and you would make sure that that person is the one who is disclosing information to the people it needs to be disclosed to. Who you're talking about internally is different to who you're talking about externally. And what you share with your lawyer is a lot different from what you share with the media. So make sure as part of your early planning that you understand what that communication is going to be, who's going to be the communication center standpoint, and the rest of the team is trained not to be talking to people they shouldn't be until they're ready to talk to them. The flip side is, when you are talking to them, make sure that you do communicate, that you are spending the time internally advising the people who need to be advised so they can make the decisions they need to make in order to move the process forward. Know what your resources are. Obviously, DTI we have available here in Delaware. You guys should all be familiar with them. What they bring to the state. It's not just, government support and education support. They also provide support for small businesses and for private citizens. You can check out their website for more information about it there. They provide information for you on where to report scams. They talk about the Delaware data breach law. They talk about, the references with the Delaware Department of Justice and make sure you check out their website from a business perspective as well from a personal website, from a personal perspective, to find out all the resources that DTI has available to you. Obviously, they recommend if there's a cybersecurity incident, they want you to report that as soon as possible, not only for the risk reduction to you, but how that might impact other people outside your organization as well. You want to report that as long as it's within reason, it's okay within for your business. So, I know I blew through a lot of that, especially because I didn't have any of my talking notes, and I know I had more stuff to say about it, but hopefully it gives you an idea of just some of the preparedness you need to have going into this, right? So the idea here is you've done all these things, everybody tells you, okay, this is the documentation you're supposed to have, I'm following my best practices, now I have a breach, what do? This is the uh-oh moment, and what have I learned from the things that I've done? Have I actually done it correctly, or have I not done it correctly? So I'm going to cover a couple things here. I'm going to give you some real-world examples of the better and worse that I've unfortunately had to be part of in my time here with Diamond in the last 10 years. Good couple things. Long-term logging, right? If you don't have long-term logging in place, you should. If you have any new systems, logging should be turned on. Data anymore is cheap. right? It's a lot cheaper than it used to be. If logging can be enabled, turn it on for everything. For every sub-function, for whatever it is, turn it on, because you're never going to know when you're going to need it. And if you have a choice between two vendors and one offers you logging and one doesn't, go with the one that has logging, because that kind of stuff lets you piece together the trail of how you got to where you were, and you never know when you need that information. We talked a little bit more about the dormancy of these malicious actors and how long they're in their system, and being able to know that they're out of the system, how they first came in, or how do you actually close the gap behind it. That's where this long-term logging comes into place. If you don't have a SIEM tool for doing data aggregation and long-term logging and archiving analysis, you should consider one or have one in place. Make that off-site if possible, because you don't want that to be on-site and have that your own logging system deleted or destroyed in the event of a disaster. So I had two different incidents related to VPN access and insider attacks. And in both cases, these were IT individuals that worked. One worked for me and one worked for a customer of ours. Both were let go, and both attacked the company they worked for in different ways. The first, for the guy who worked for me, he had gotten the password of a previous employee while he still worked there. A laptop was dropped off for him. He got the password to work on the guy's laptop, and he was let go from the organization. He came back in using that user's credentials and then used the administrative account and destroyed systems. But we were able to, by looking at the VPN logs, which we retained over the course of a year and a half, we were able to match up the IP address that he used on this attack to an IP address that he'd used one time in a year and a half worth of logs. He had visited his parents' house and he had logged in. That was the IP address. He thought he was smart. I'll go to my parents' house and I'll use their IT computer to attack you, and you won't know about it. But we had in the logs, and we matched it up, and he was prosecuted. The other individual worked for a client of ours, was let go, went out to the parking lot and jumped onto the Wi-Fi and jumped onto an admin account that still existed and that he knew about. And in that particular case, the admin account hadn't been used in years, except for the last time it had been used was by an IP address that he also uses for his home VPN. And again, the information was enough that the prosecutors were able to put together enough other chain of events that in both of those cases, having those long-term logs that didn't roll over, both provided criminal prosecutions for insider threats. So this is a case where long-term logging really saved our bacon. So it helped us out a whole lot there. So that's a good plus for us. Talk about activity logging, make sure it's whenever possible. Office 365, if you have it. If you are an original Office 365 tenant from a long time ago, you used to have to go in and turn on auditing, like on a per mailbox basis. And that's not that way anymore, right? You're a new client, it's turned on everywhere. If you're an old legacy tenant, it should have been migrated over, but you'll want to double check and make sure that's in place for you. You'll hear multi-factor authentication till people are blue in the face anymore. And, you know, the previous two things I said we did great with the logging. How we doing? The previous two things we talked about, with the logging, would have been great if we had MFA in place, would have prevented those two attacks. Given the age in which they happened, MFA was still kind of coming to the forefront. But if it happened today, in both situations, MFA would have solved that problem. Realize, though, that not all MFA is equal. And what I mean by that is that as we've gone back and looked back at some of the customers who've deployed MFA, we found some shortcomings in them. The first is that a lot of MFA products require that you have a client installed onto the machines that are being protected. So, you know, if you're trying to log into a workstation, you have to have the 40 Authenticator or the Duo client application loaded onto the workstation. Well, what happens if your IT team forgets to put that on there? Then that machine is not protected, right? So one of the things that you should consider, and we've rolled out to a couple of our customers now, is something that is that's running clientless, or something that doesn't require a client to protect. That also protects you from things like session hijacking or pass the hash. These are situations where a bad guy can capture credentials that are cached on a machine. You've already logged into a machine and you log out. Well, the bad guy can go to that machine, can grab those credentials and they can replay them somewhere else and they can pretend like they're you. Okay? So there are MFA solutions out there. We're not a reseller of one, but I'll name drop Authlight because we've used. And the value to a product like this is it's MFA, but it's security on demand. So what happens is your administrative accounts aren't, as I'm a domain administrator, I don't have domain administrator credentials until the moment I log in and I supply my MFA, and I'm given my session credentials for just that session, and the moment I'm off, I'm no longer a domain admin. And that sort of MFA protects you from these kinds of session hijacking attacks, or remote administration tools, or remote PowerShell tools. I don't have a lack of MFA allowed internal use. That was another situation we had. So we had a situation where an account was compromised. In this case, there was a local user account that was set up, and the local user administrative account was set up with the same password as the domain administrator account, because the IT team was like, well, they're all administrator accounts, so why does it matter? Well, because the local administrator account was really easy to break, but the domain administrator account wasn't secure with MFA. And again, had it just been a normal MFA, it still wouldn't have mattered, because the attacker would have come from that machine, which didn't have the MFA credentials on it. They would have been able to do a remote PowerShell remote access tool. But with something that's giving you permissions on demand, that kind of tool would prevent that sort of attack. So that's something to consider in your stack, and there's a couple of products in that space that work for you. Worry about your availability of authenticating systems. It's great to self-host your MFA. There's a nice cost associated with that. But if you lose your local MFA or your internet goes down and you can't log into things, what do you do? In these cases, you'd have a break glass account. If you don't know what that is, or you don't have one, I'm going to tell you. If you've seen the old movies where like there's a glass panel on the wall and the guy breaks it and opens it up and he pulls something out, that's where that term comes from, right? A break glass account is in case of all disasters, and I've lost everything else, including my ability to log into MFA. That's something they don't talk about very often. How do I get into my systems? Your MFA, your break glass account doesn't have MFA on it, right? It is highly, highly secured with a long password. You need to figure out, how am I storing that password? You want to make sure that you change that password whenever it's used. You want to make sure that you audit the use of that password. For one of our organizations, we do a split password, like a two-button nuclear approach. We have half the password, they have half the password. If we want to use this account, we both have to come together and decide we want to use it. Because we're purposely turning off MFA. We're saying, we know MFA is great, but we need this account to get us into the system in case everything else is a disaster. How are we going to do it? We had a situation, the same situation, where the guy jumped in on the Wi-Fi and deleted a bunch of stuff. Well, in that case, he deleted all the local accounts on the domain, which were then synchronized up to Office 365. All the administrative accounts up at Office 365 all got deleted. And there was no dedicated tenant account at that point that we knew the credentials for. So now we were entirely locked out of Office 365, and we had no way of getting back into the system. And I spent a week tracking down through 3 old vendors somebody who might have had that old password from a previous vendor, and I begged and I completed professionally. And luckily I tracked somebody down who happened to have that old credential and got us back in again, as opposed to us having a break glass account that we had established, knew it existed, right? And doesn't have an obvious name like break glass account in case somebody's in there knowing to delete it. But the people who need to know that account exists have that information if possible. We talked about the non-synced accounts, making sure that if you are doing synchronization, we've made a huge shift for all the clients that we support. That not only do we have synced accounts, but for every one of our tenants, we make sure that there's non-synced accounts in Office 365 that provide administrative access. So we often change the login, use the on Microsoft login, so it's visually obvious that that's the tenant-based account rather than the synced account, since you can change the login ID. But always make sure you've got multiple methods for logging in. This is for all of your administrative situations, right? I know there's a desire to have least privilege, and you try to narrow it down to only one guy has access, and you go up the food chain. Well, if that one guy disappears or has appendicitis, he can't come in, what are you going to do, right? So you need to have more than one person and more than one account in case something goes wrong. Having those on different systems, an internal system and an external system, is also really important there for you. We talked about domain destruction. Let's talk about focus during the event itself. We talk about a war room here. So when the event is going down, what we found is that you need a place that you can work and be able to your team who's doing the recovery needs a place that they could work and be able to handle that. There's going to be external communications coming in. They're going to be impacting your ability to get your work done, depending on the size of your team. You're going to be wanting, we talked a little bit about having dedicated points of contact so that you can make sure that the people who are doing the work aren't the ones that have to keep providing the updates multiple times. There's nothing more distracting than the people who are trying to do the work. If somebody keeps knocking on the door, where are we at, where are we at, where are we at, right? So what we found is that having a concentrated area you could work, having a whiteboard where you've published things like this is when our next update is going to be so people know who are coming in, making sure that you've got a dedicated point of contact that you can provide the message to, that they in turn can relay the message to other people. It helps you avoid distractions, helps you focus on what's going on. This can be both a physical location or a digital one. Put together a Slack room or a Teams room and do all of your work there. And the digital rooms are even better because you've got the benefit of having the ability to have recording going on, everything's happening, and you've got a data dump, right? You get all this information coming in, and sometimes it's overwhelming. And again, I'm talking here from perspective of a small business, not from perspective where you got an incident team of 50 people attacking it. You got 3 guys in a room who are working 20-hour days trying to recover a business, and the information is just kind of coming in on you. Dumping it into a Teams room lets you go back and look at the information at an interval better than just information overload. So take advantage of those kinds of things. Have a conference line people can call into and out of and see what's going in. They can catch up. So if somebody takes a break and comes back, all that information is available there, available to them. Know whether that room is going to be for your internal team, for your external third parties, or maybe both. We've had situations where we've got 2 different rooms. We've got one room which is just the team, and we've got another room which may include some management and may include some third-party vendors, depending on how we're trying to recover. How are we doing with time? Okay?
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes, all right. Talk about the information overload, having the timestamps in there. Make sure you slow down. Take a break. You might think that moving ahead as fast as you can possibly move is a good thing. It's not. We all will succumb to lack of sleep. We will get grumpy. We will get irritated. We will get agitated. And, when you walk in and I bite your head off because it's on day 4, it's not because I don't like you. It's because I'm trying to focus on the task in front of me. But then I start making mistakes, right? I haven't eaten. I haven't taken a bathroom break. I haven't done those kinds of things. So we had a situation where very thing happened. We were working on a project, and we lost our primary backup, we lost our secondary backup, but we had a third backup. Great bully for us. We attached the third backup to the system, to a backup system, and it didn't immediately recognize the attached drive. And the message popped up, and it asked the technician if he wanted to initialize the drive. He said yes, because he was on day 4, and blew away the third backup. And the moment he hit it, he knew he made the mistake, but he clicked too fast. So just like you guys click too fast and little OK buttons pop up and you say, what did that message warning was? That one was our third backup. Totally lost. He ran down the hallway screaming, trying to pull the plug out. It was too late, right? So lack of sleep, make sure you slow down. People of your team can help you. In the other situation, a member of our team was like, I can't help recover your situation, but she went together, she put together the lunch order for everybody. She just walked in and put food in front of us and said, eat. Because she knew we weren't going to eat. But as soon as it was there, I had to make a decision, moved us along just great. Think about those kind of things. Think how you can help your team, even if you can't help directly recover as a technical person. Deletion of unnecessary evidence, right? We talked about accumulating data and wanting to clear it off. And it's great to think, I'm accumulating all this stuff, I don't need this, I'll just delete it now. Keep it. You might need it. Wait till you're past the recovery, wait till you're in your post-incident phase, wait until somebody says, no, I don't need that, and I'm 100% sure I don't need it, before you get rid of it, and then maybe still keep it anyway. Another situation, I don't need that screenshot, it's irrelevant. So we deleted the screenshot, turned out to be relevant. Talk about best interest, right? When this thing happens, there becomes a who's to blame. Everybody starts pointing fingers at each other. You got multiple vendors. Everybody wants to call somebody else out and say, it's your fault, it's my fault, it's his fault. Nobody wants to be responsible for it, right? Walls go up and everybody starts to say, hey, I'm looking out for me, I'm number one. And unfortunately, you got to think about your insurance companies. They are not your friend. They are a business. They are in it to do a business the way they want to. They are there to get you through it, but they are going to be making decisions that are relevant to their business. You as a business owner should know what your policy limits are right now, today, and you want to make sure they haven't changed, right? And you may say, well, can they change? Absolutely. They could have changed, and maybe they didn't notify you. But they did notify you, and you didn't get the email. And now you're in the middle of a disaster, and you find out, well, I thought I had $1 million, but I only have $250,000 because some other change happened. Was some limit put on your policy that you didn't know? Did they say, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to be susceptible to the sublimit? Maybe you did or maybe you didn't do that. But the insurance company, they said, we got it in writing, we notified you. Make sure you double check that information. And unfortunately, we were in that situation where things had changed for a company. They thought they had certain levels of insurance. Turned out that they didn't. So I would absolutely make sure you review that with your insurance policy. This also talks about your legal team, right? The insurance company has a legal team. It's their legal team. It's not your legal team, right? You should have your own legal team that advises you on the decisions that are appropriate for your business, for your notifications, for your decisions. And they should be involved in all the decision making you have during a breach, involving which coverage you're going to, what you're going to elect for, and what you're going to do as part of the recovery effort. We had a situation where the legal team for the insurance company is instructing us not to notify the police, the law enforcement. Now, there are times when maybe you can't or you shouldn't, depending on disclosure, you're private, you're public. What are the reasons for that? But you should know if there's a legal reason that you should or should not listen to that. But you want to make sure that you're getting the information from the people whose best interest belongs to your business and not to the insurance company on the other end. Okay? Again, understanding your limits. There might be limits on ransomware, recovery, disclosure. They're going to be putting together their forensics teams, so doing this recovery. Their forensics teams are going to get paid. You might have other vendors you're working with that you've brought in. You want to make sure that they're taken care of as well. So again, knowing where those policies and those limits are and understanding who's going to get paid for their work and helping do the recovery is really critical. There's going to be, I mentioned legal and state requirements. Your legal team is going to help you figure out whether you got that or not. The exact opposite of that story, another situation, law enforcement helped us because we had worked with them on another breach. And because we had this personal relationship, because we had this ability to work with them and help them out, they were able to help us out on another one because we had that kind of, hey, we're in Delaware, we help each other out kind of thing. So, sometimes helping folks out and making that, handshake can really get you somewhere. Empty promises. Get it in writing. Record meetings if possible. There was too many times we've been on phone calls where we've heard things and I will swear up and down that that's what they promised us. They go, no, that's not what I told you. Because it wasn't recorded, and it wasn't in email, and it wasn't in writing. You got to protect yourself. You got to protect your business. Don't think that they're protecting you. Only you and your teams can protect your business, and that's the biggest takeaway here. Been burned too many times on that, and you don't want to have that happen to you. Last bit, because we're just about to wrap it up here, is thinking about things that are temporary in your organization that will come back to haunt you. Proof of concept. You build a system saying, hey, I want to check this out and I want to see how it's going to work. Whenever you do that, it should always be built like you're building it for production. It should be built for the same security. It should be built that is going to last. You should have plans in the proof of concept for what you're going to do. How long are you going to keep it around and when are you going to get rid of it? Even if you don't have that, it winds up persisting. And people forget about these things, and these little ghost systems get stuck around. A proof of concept, you stick an Exchange server up to check something and do an upgrade, and you forget about it. And then a year later, you weren't patching it, and now somebody says, well, there's an Exchange vulnerability. You're like, we're okay. We don't have Exchange, except for that one over there that you got sitting on your internet that you forgot about because you were doing proof of concept on, right? So make sure you've got things in place to clean up after yourself and plan to clean up for them. But continue to know that those things exist, and if they're going to stay around, make sure you're patching them and dealing with them as they exist out there. This goes to your development environments as well. They should be fully isolated. If they're not isolated, they should be fully patched. Don't think just because you're a developer and you're working on legacy systems that gives you any ability to not uphold the standards of somebody else, right? That you're not going to have to do the same kind of security because the security gets in the way of the things that we're trying to do, and we can't work with developers. They need to make sure they do because they become a threat vector just like anybody else. Make sure you're removing your terminated users. This is not just disabling an account and leaving people as members of groups. We had a security breach where they disable users, they put them in an OU called disabled users. Great. Except the attacker then got in, found a disabled user, and re-enabled it. But the user wasn't taken out of any groups. So now they have the ability to have all the groups that user was a member of, right? And now that user was part of a disabled OU that had been accumulating over 2 years, and there was 100 users in there. And when you look at that list of users, it's real hard to see that little checkbox that says this guy is active, this guy's not active. So it was really easy for the user to mask themselves over a period of time and use an account that it existed and didn't throw off any flags because it was a previous user in the system. So, we encourage our customers nowadays to make sure you've got an audit policy in place that reviews your terminated users, has a process that says after X number of days, delete these users. When you delete them, take them out of the groups they belong to. It's not that hard to go back and put them in the security groups afterwards. The number of times you rehire the guy that you terminated is way smaller than everybody thinks it's going to be, right? So, maybe leave it around for a couple days so the SID doesn't change, but get rid of the groups and disable them and bring them back again. Really important here. Make sure you've got an audit in place to follow that, and if you've got a process, run an audit to make sure it's being handled. It always starts off great, and then 6 months later, you find out that HR is not telling your IT team that people are being terminated, and you got a bunch of accounts that are active or deactivated, the whole thing. Always secure by design. Plan for the fact that it's going to be running for a while. I know there's time and cost involved with that. Let's see, moving quickly, things you should know, like service accounts as a domain administrator. Like, you don't need to do that, but that's easier, and IT guys do it. Like, oh great, domain administrator, it works, bing, checked off the box. Yeah, except for the fact that your gateway gets compromised, and now the thing is sitting on the edge, the guy can make a network traversal. That happened, We've got a VPN between two companies. We're partners with each other. What could go wrong? Why do I have to spend the extra time writing ACLs that limit that only this machine can talk to this machine and only on this port? That takes an awful lot of time. Things don't work. They're partners. Great, until partner A gets infected and moves over to partner B because everything's allowed. That happened. We've got it covered. Don't be so sure of yourself when you're doing the eradication portion that you move on to recovery and say, everything's great. Don't trust yourself till you know that it's gotten here. Bad guys are going to have secondary attack vectors. They're going to leave things residual in the system. We had a situation where we saw all the advanced warnings. We looked at it, we identified it, the team dealt with it. Great. The company says, we'll deal with it in the morning because we don't want to interrupt business. Well, the attack happened at 4 in the morning when everybody was sleeping because everybody thought they had locked it down and there was secondary residual. So don't let that happen to yourself. If you're not sure, it's better to stay off until you know you've got it eradicated, then come back too early, let the bad guy back in, make a larger attack or redo the effort you've already done. All right, so I know I talked really, really fast at the end there, try to get through all the slides. Don't know where we are with time, but if I've got time for a question or two, I'll throw that out to the crowd. If anybody has a question for me, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming today.